5 reasons to buy a Honda VFR1200FD. Number 1, the engine. It's a super smooth V4 which kicks out 170 brake horsepower. Low down in the rev range it has a reasonable amount of torque, and as you go up the revs it just builds and builds and builds. You could not want more power in a bike for use on the road. Number 2, perhaps a little controversially, is the gearbox. This bike has a DCT automatic gearbox. The gearbox and engine combination is perfectly matched. It can change gear faster than any human, and you have the option of drive mode, sport mode or manual mode. For poodling around town, it will take all the stress away. For riding with gusto, switch it into manual mode, and apart from the fact you haven't got a clutch, there's no real difference to a manual bike. Oh, except you can't over rev it. Number 3 is the looks. Okay, it may not be everyone's cup of tea, but there are very few bikes that will turn as many heads as this bike will. There are little touches around like the exhaust that looks something like a bit of Art Deco design, especially these little features at the tail of the exhaust, and little additional features like the LEDs on the end of the wing mirrors, or the design of the headlight that when you're riding makes it look like there's 2 little LEDs on the top corners. I've never had a bike that creates so much interest, people walking around the bike while I'm sitting at traffic lights to have a closer look, or just waving at me as I go past. Number 4, the suspension. The suspension doesn't have a lot of adjustment, but it's incredibly good. Whereas some bikes, when you drive over potholes or rough road, you really feel shaking coming up through the bike. On this, it always remains calm and composed. The suspension has a feeling of quality that I just wasn't expecting when I bought the bike. And last but not least, the shaft drive. No messing around with chains, no cleaning, no adjusting. It's not the smoothest shaft drive I've driven, but it is pretty damn good. 5 reasons not to buy a Honda VFR1200FD. Number 1, and the biggest single issue with this bike, is a combination of fuel economy and fuel tank. The fuel tank is either 18.5 or 19 litres depending on the age of the bike, and the engine is going to do roughly 35 to the gallon if you're lucky. Altogether, you've got a total range of roughly 140 miles, which on a sports tourer is tiny. Number 2 is the seat, and to be quite honest, you'll be grateful of the poor range when you sit on the seat. It's not comfortable. About an hour, maybe 2 hours, and you're going to have a numb bum. Of course, if you're only doing 140 miles to a tank, you're going to want to stop and fill up with fuel anyway, so does it matter? Number 3, it's a top-heavy thigh heater. The V4 engine has the front cylinders further apart and the rear cylinders closer together between your legs. They get very hot, which means that this part of the chassis here heats up. I swear you could fry an egg on it sometimes, and it's not particularly pleasant in hot weather. The other thing is, because the engine sits up here and you've got your fuel tank on top, it's actually quite a lot of weight at the top of the bike. Number 4 is the steering. The bike's incredibly solid when you're going in a straight line, but when it comes to a corner, you really do have to shove the handlebars to get it to go round. This isn't a super flickable bike. It never feels unsafe on a corner, but it just doesn't encourage you to flick the bike into a corner. It's much more reserved than that. Lastly is technology, or to be precise, a lack of it. There's no cruise control, you've got basic traction control, you have ABS, and you have a, to be frank, pathetic trip computer that doesn't do what you want it to do. Even when this bike was launched in 2009, it was a bit behind the times on technology. By the time they stopped selling the bike in 2016, it felt centuries behind. Now, personally, I don't particularly like a lot of technology on a bike, so I'm quite happy. But if you're into your gadgets, wrong bike.